He doesn't remember the woman who begged. He doesn't remember the woman who waited. He remembers the woman who stood up, quietly, and walked away without turning back. Not with drama, not with threats, but with a calm that unsettled him more than any argument ever could. There is something deeply imprinted in the male psyche when a woman leaves from strength rather than pain. Because in that moment, she breaks an unspoken contract, the belief that her presence was guaranteed. And the mind does not forget what it once believed it owned. You see, when a woman walks away with dignity, she does something rare. She removes herself without trying to control the outcome. No explanations designed to convince. No last emotional performance. Just clarity. And clarity is unforgettable. As Carl Jung said, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. When you stop resisting, when you stop clinging, something shifts in the unconscious. The man is left alone with himself, and that is where memory is formed. Men are conditioned to associate emotional intensity with attachment. Tears, arguments, chasing, these feel familiar. They dissolve over time. But a woman who chooses herself introduces something foreign, emotional sovereignty. And the psyche pays attention to what it cannot dominate. This is why walking away is not abandonment, it is individuation. In Jung's view, individuation is the return to the self. And when a woman chooses herself, she becomes a mirror. Not a mirror that flatters, but one that reveals. He begins to replay moments. Not because he misses the comfort, but because he lost access. What marks him is not her absence, but the way she left without asking to be chosen. That silence rewires perception. Because now, the narrative is no longer "she needs me," but "I lost her." And loss activates memory far more powerfully than possession. This is only the beginning. Because emotional strength does not shout, it imprints. What unsettles him is not the goodbye. It's the absence of negotiation. Men are psychologically prepared for resistance. For tears. For explanations. For second chances disguised as closure. But when a woman leaves without asking to be understood, she removes the stage where he expected to perform control. And suddenly, there is nothing to respond to, except himself. This is where memory becomes emotional. In the unconscious, silence is not emptiness. Silence is space, and space forces reflection. As Carl Jung believed, the unconscious speaks most loudly when the conscious mind runs out of distractions. Her quiet departure becomes a symbolic wound, not because it was cruel, but because it was complete. He remembers her not because she wanted him to remember. He remembers her because she did not need to. When a woman walks away emotionally intact, she creates a rupture in the male narrative. He can no longer define himself as the center. The dynamic shifts from power to consequence, and consequence leaves a deeper imprint than affection ever does. Notice this carefully. Men do not obsess over women who chase them. They revisit women who ended the chase. Why? Because the psyche cannot close a loop it did not finish controlling. Her departure interrupts the internal storyline where he expected her to stay available, adjustable, patient. Instead, she chose alignment over attachment. That choice creates cognitive dissonance. He starts to question moments he once dismissed. Her boundaries, her pauses, her calm strength that now, in hindsight, feels heavier. Not because she was perfect, but because she was self-contained. And self-contained women trigger something ancient in the masculine psyche, respect mixed with loss. This is where emotional strength becomes unforgettable. Not loud strength, not performative independence, but the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. A woman who walks away without bitterness leaves behind something unfinished, not in her, but in him. And the mind returns again and again to what it failed to secure, not to relive love, but to understand why control slipped through its fingers. This is why he remembers her at random moments. Not during happiness, but during stillness. Because silence does not fade. It echoes. And the echo has only just begun. What he didn't anticipate was the reversal. When she walked away, he assumed time would erase her. That distance would dull the impact. That absence would return control to him. But something unexpected happened instead. The power quietly shifted. Not to her hands, but to her absence. In Jung's view, The psyche reacts most strongly when an internal archetype is disrupted, and she disrupted the archetype of availability. She was no longer the woman who waited to be chosen. She became the woman who chose. And choice, once exercised, cannot be unseen. This is where the memory deepens. He begins to notice that other connections feel louder but emptier. More effort, less substance. He may not consciously compare, but the unconscious always does. It remembers how she didn't plead for reassurance, how she didn't collapse when things became uncertain, how she left without trying to secure a softer ending. That composure redefines her retroactively. Men often realize a woman's value after the dynamic ends, not because they are cruel, but because certainty dulls perception. Her departure removes certainty, and perception sharpens under loss. This is not regret in the romantic sense. It is recognition. Recognition that she was not reacting, she was responding to herself. Recognition that she did not disappear to provoke longing, but because she refused to abandon her inner alignment. And that distinction matters deeply to the psyche. A woman who walks away from clarity cannot be rewritten as too emotional or too needy. There is no chaos to dismiss, no mess to justify forgetting her. Only a clean ending that leaves nowhere to project blame. And that unsettles him, because now the question is no longer, why did she leave? It becomes, why wasn't I enough for her to stay? That question lingers, not because she wanted revenge, but because she chose truth over comfort. And truth, once introduced, reshapes memory. He may move on, he may love again, but her imprint remains as a reference point, the woman who didn't bargain for love. She didn't punish. She didn't threaten. She didn't collapse. She walked away whole. And that is why emotional strength leaves a permanent impression. Because strength doesn't try to be remembered. It simply is. Time doesn't erase her, it rearranges her. At first, he feels relief. The absence of tension, the quiet return to routine. But slowly, something begins to surface in unexpected moments. Not nostalgia, not longing in the way he understands it. Something deeper, something heavier. Presence reveals itself most clearly after it's gone. As Carl Jung observed, the unconscious does not forget what carried meaning. And a woman who walked away without bitterness becomes meaning itself, because she refused to distort herself to stay. What remains in his memory is not her voice, but her energy. The way she didn't chase clarity, the way she didn't argue to be understood, the way she accepted reality without reshaping herself to fit it. That composure becomes symbolic, and symbols are permanent residents of the psyche. He begins to feel it when things go wrong elsewhere, when conversations feel hollow, when affection feels transactional. That's when her memory returns, not as desire, but as contrast. Men don't always miss women. They miss how they felt around them. And emotional strength creates a feeling of grounding that the nervous system remembers. When she walked away, she didn't just remove herself from his life. She removed a stabilizing reference point. And without it, he feels the imbalance. This is where the impression deepens. He realizes she never needed him to complete her. She was not building her identity around his validation. And now, without her presence, he becomes aware of the subtle power she held simply by being self-contained. That awareness is uncomfortable, because it forces a confrontation with his own emotional position. Was he choosing or being chosen? Was he present or merely comfortable? These questions don't demand answers immediately, but they echo in the background of future connections. And that echo carries her shape. A woman who walks away intact leaves no emotional debris behind. Nothing to resent, nothing to dismiss, nothing to blame. And without those defenses, the psyche has only one option: to integrate the experience. She becomes part of his internal landscape, not as the one who left, but as the one who showed him what quiet strength looks like. And once seen, that image never fully fades. What he carries forward is not regret, it is recalibration. After her, something subtle changes in how he perceives women. Not immediately, not consciously, but the internal scale has shifted. He has encountered a standard that did not demand, did not plead, did not collapse. And once the psyche encounters a higher internal reference, it quietly rejects what falls beneath it. This is where she becomes unforgettable. In Jungian psychology, an encounter that alters perception becomes a psychic imprint. Carl Jung spoke of experiences that reorganize the inner world rather than simply pass through it. She was not a chapter, she was a threshold. From this point on, something feels off when a woman overexplains. When she negotiates her worth. When she stays where she is not met. He may not name it, but his body recognizes the difference. And recognition always traces back to the first encounter that revealed it. Her emotional strength becomes the quiet comparison. Not because she tried to teach him anything, but because she lived it. She showed, without instruction, what self-respect looks like when it is embodied rather than spoken. An embodiment cannot be argued away. This is why he remembers her during moments of decision. When another woman asks for reassurance he once took for granted. When someone stays where she shouldn't. When love feels loud but unstable. In those moments, her absence becomes presence. A woman who walks away without resentment leaves no emotional hooks behind. Nothing to replay in anger. Nothing to rewrite as drama. That clean exit forces integration. The mind must absorb the lesson instead of deflecting it. And the lesson is simple, but profound. She did not abandon him. She did not punish him. She honored herself. That realization matures inside him slowly. Sometimes years later. Sometimes only when he is faced with the consequences of settling. But it arrives eventually, because emotional strength has gravity. And gravity always pulls memory back to its source. She becomes the woman he didn't lose through conflict, but through clarity. And clarity is the one thing the psyche never forgets. There comes a point, often much later, when he feels the urge to reopen the door. Not always with words. Sometimes with a message that pretends to be casual. Sometimes with curiosity disguised as concern. Sometimes only in thought. This is not because he suddenly understands everything. It's because the psyche dislikes unfinished meaning. A woman who walked away without emotional collapse left him with no role to reclaim. No hero moment. No chance to be forgiven or rejected. And that absence of resolution becomes psychologically uncomfortable. The mind wants symmetry. It wants closure on its terms. But she didn't offer that. As Carl Jung described, when an experience cannot be integrated consciously, it returns through repetition. He doesn't return because he wants to resume the past. He returns because something inside him was never completed. What he's really trying to rewrite is not the relationship. It's the loss of control. Her strength denied him the familiar emotional script. She didn't ask why. She didn't linger to be chosen. She didn't need to be reassured that she mattered. And because of that, there is no version of the story where he stands at the center. That is what haunts him. If she had stayed angry, he could dismiss her as emotional. If she had stayed pleading, he could dismiss her as dependent. But she stayed aligned, and alignment cannot be minimized. So when he remembers her, it isn't with triumph or regret. It's with a quiet discomfort. Because deep down, he knows this. She didn't lose him. He lost access to a woman who knew who she was without needing his reflection. And that realization doesn't fade with time. It matures. It deepens. It waits. Until one day, he understands that the reason she is unforgettable is not because she left, but because she left without breaking. And that is the kind of ending the mind keeps trying to rewrite, but never can. There is a delayed reaction that happens in some men. Quiet, internal, unavoidable. It arrives not when she leaves, but when life confronts him with contrast. Respect, for many men, is not immediate. It is earned retroactively through consequence. And a woman who walked away without noise becomes the benchmark against which future dynamics are measured, not consciously, but instinctively. He begins to notice it when effort feels one-sided, when presence feels unstable, when admiration feels demanded instead of embodied. Only then does he realize what her strength actually represented. She didn't need to threaten distance to be respected. She was distance, voluntarily chosen. As Carl Jung understood, maturity is often born through loss, not instruction. And her departure was not a lesson she tried to teach. It was one he was forced to learn. This is where delayed respect emerges. He understands, sometimes painfully, that she wasn't asking for more than he could give. She was asking for alignment. And when it wasn't there, she removed herself without trying to reshape him. That restraint, that refusal to manipulate, reframes her entirely. She was not difficult. She was discerning. Men respect what they cannot bend. And when he realizes she did not bend, not out of pride, but out of self-loyalty, something settles in him. A sober awareness replaces the old narrative. He may never say it out loud, but internally, the recognition is clear. She knew her value before he recognized it. That is why the respect arrives late, because it required him to grow enough to see it. And growth, unlike attraction, cannot be rushed. By the time he understands who she was, she is already gone, not emotionally, but energetically, no longer waiting to be acknowledged, no longer available for reconsideration. And that finality solidifies her place in memory, not as the woman he almost chose, but as the woman who never waited to be chosen at all. And that realization follows him quietly into every relationship that comes after. What remains after everything fades is not emotion, it is orientation. Long after the connection ends, after names blur and details soften, her imprint continues to guide his internal compass, not as longing, but as calibration. She becomes the silent standard his psyche refers to when deciding what feels right and what feels beneath him. This is how emotional strength travels forward in time. As Carl Jung understood, the psyche organizes itself around meaningful encounters, not pleasant ones, transformative ones. And she transformed something fundamental, his understanding of what a woman can be when she does not negotiate her worth. After her, he hesitates before underestimating. He pauses before assuming availability. He senses when someone is staying from fear rather than choice. Even if he never names it, he feels it. He may find himself drawn to women who resemble her strength, not her personality, but her posture, the grounded presence, the emotional economy, the way she did not need to prove depth. And if he cannot meet that standard, he feels it as friction. This is where the impression becomes permanent. Because a woman who walks away without resentment installs a boundary inside him, not against her, but against settling. She didn't lecture. She didn't demand growth. She simply refused to remain where alignment was missing. That refusal rewires expectation. He understands now, often unconsciously, that real connection does not chase. It stands. That desire without self-respect collapses, and that the women who stay at all costs are not the ones who endure in memory. She endures because she did not stay, and that paradox lives quietly inside him. Every time he encounters a woman who tries too hard, he feels the contrast. Every time he encounters a woman who leaves too easily, he senses the absence of depth. And somewhere between those extremes, her imprint remains, steady, dignified, unforced. She is no longer a person in his life. She is a reference point in his psyche, and reference points do not disappear. They guide, silently, forever. After her, something subtle is gone. Not excitement, not attraction, but illusion. He can still desire. He can still connect. But somewhere beneath it all, a quiet awareness remains. The awareness that not every woman will stay, and not every bond can be taken for granted. That knowing changes how deeply he can unconsciously relax into entitlement again. She ended that chapter forever. As Carl Jung taught, once consciousness expands, it cannot return to innocence. And her departure expanded his awareness, not through pain, but through clarity. She showed him that love without self-betrayal exists. And once seen, the psyche rejects its opposites. This is why some men say, years later, it was never the same after her. They don't mean romance. They mean certainty, because certainty was what she removed. He may find comfort elsewhere. He may find companionship. But something in him now scans for presence, not tolerance. For steadiness, not accommodation. And when it's missing, dissatisfaction creeps in, even if he can't explain why. She taught him, without trying, that access to a woman's heart is not automatic. It is earned through consistency, depth, and respect. And that lesson lingers far longer than passion ever could. This is the quiet cost of losing a woman who walked away whole. Not punishment, not regret, but awareness. And awareness reshapes everything. He understands now that love does not stay where it must be convinced, that a woman's departure can be an act of integrity rather than rejection, and that the ones who leave with dignity do not disappear, they remain internally. She is not the one who hurt him. She is the one who changed him. And change, once internalized, cannot be undone, only lived with. What endures is not longing. It is reverence. Long after emotions cool, long after life carries him forward, something remains untouched by time. The respect he never consciously gave, but permanently feels. Because respect born from loss is deeper than respect born from possession. She didn't demand it. She didn't negotiate for it. She evoked it by leaving whole. As Carl Jung believed, the most powerful transformations happen when the ego is bypassed and the soul is confronted directly. Her exit did exactly that. It went around his defenses and settled straight into his unconscious as truth. She showed him something irreversible, that a woman can love deeply and still walk away. That connection does not require self-erasure. That dignity is louder than protest. And this is why she is never reduced in memory. He does not speak of her casually. He does not dismiss her as just someone from the past. There is always a pause, subtle but telling, because she represents the moment he realized that not every woman will stay long enough to be taken for granted. And that realization humbles even the strongest ego. She becomes the woman he cannot casually revisit, the one he cannot access again in the same way, the one whose absence taught him more than her presence ever could. Not because she wanted to be unforgettable, but because she refused to abandon herself for love. And that is why men remember women who walk away, not as loss, not as regret, but as the quiet turning point where something inside them finally understood. Emotional strength does not chase permanence. It becomes it. And once a woman embodies that, she never truly leaves.